it used to be an ocean. There used to be an ocean there, but no longer there.
その頃この映画作った頃はそれが果たしてそのいいことなのか悪いことなのか。
So back when I made this movie, I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing.
そういうことを結構考えてた時期の作品ですね。
So that was the time when I made this. At the time, I was contemplating over all that.
Going back a little bit, my experience with anime is probably a little bit different than some others. So, I mean, I was growing up in the 90s, which is when I was really kind of starting to get into anime, and I didn't really know about like anime clubs and fan subs and tape trading and things like that at the time. So my only real experience with anime was like just going to the video stores and like Blockbuster Video and just kind of checking out what was on the shelves and renting whatever was available. And yeah, eventually in college I rented the tape of Ghost in the Shell, and they only had the dubbed version there. And so yeah, I rented it and I watched it and I was like, okay, this is interesting, but I don't know, it didn't really grab me at the time. Like, okay, they're doing some really interesting things visually, but I think for some reason, like the dub just it didn't connect with me. But then, yeah, a little bit later, a couple years, I had a chance to go back and watch it in the original Japanese, and that's when I think things really clicked for me. I said, okay, I think I see it a little bit more clearly now. I can really appreciate the film a little bit more now, perhaps. So my background is like I have a PhD in communication and culture, which that's what it's technically in, but that's kind of a fancy way of saying film and media studies, basically. I got that from Indiana University. Before that, I got a master's degree in Asian cultures and languages, focusing on Japanese, from the University of Texas at Austin, where I studied with Dr. Susan Napier. She wrote a book in, I think, 2000 that was on Japanese animation that really kind of set the stage for a lot of the kind of scholarly stuff that's come out since then. So my master's thesis was actually on the films of director Mamoru Oshii, and I just kind of through, I don't know, maybe skill or luck, I was able to kind of transform my master's thesis into a proposal for a book, which eventually got picked up and was published in 2004. My book is called Stray Dog of Anime, Films of Mamoru Oshii. And it was the first book in English on Oshii's films. So I tackle a lot of his films, not every single one of them, but that came out in 2004, right before, like a little bit before Ghost in the Shell Innocence came out. A couple of years ago, I was able to put out a second edition of that book where I added on to it basically. So I put the films, including Innocence and the ones that came after that as well. I'm trying to remember what drew me in particular to Oshii's films in the first place. It was during my master's program when I was working with Dr. Napier. I think I just saw something in one of Oshii's films that just really kind of caught my eye, and because I had, particularly like Ghost in the Shell and things like Angel's Egg and things like that, because one of my backgrounds was in religions and Japanese religions and kind of cross-cultural religious comparisons and things like that. And there was just something about Oshii's films that caught my eye in that regard. So it seemed like he was doing some really interesting things with like myth and religion, and that's actually what my master's thesis focused on, was his use of religion and religious symbolism in some of his science fiction films. So I think it was really that really kind of caught my eye, and then I kind of followed him through some of his other films that don't have quite so much religious symbolism, perhaps. But yeah, that was the very first thing that was the first thing that really kind of caught my eye about his films, that he was doing something really interesting with the way that he was engaging with religion. And then to find out too that I think he, at least this is the rumor that has gone around for a while, that he at one time had considered, joining the seminary, becoming involved in religion himself, and just seeing him perhaps work through some of those issues in his films just made them really interesting to me. In Angel's Egg, it takes place in a ruined city, but there's very minimal dialogue. It's very atmospheric, but some of the color palette and some of the choices really kind of can be seen in what Oshii does later in Ghost in the Shell. I definitely think we see echoes of that. Plus, you have Oshii dealing with a lot of religious symbolism as well. So, I mean, in Ghost in the Shell, you have Bible quotes in particular being used, and you have this idea of, what is inside of this cyborg body. So is there some sort of core? Is there some sort of essence that these cyborgs have within them? And I think that this is it's a very similar theme to what you have in Angel's Egg, where you have this young girl who's going through a city, and she is carrying this egg with her, and the question of what, if anything, is inside this egg. Is there something? Is it something precious, or is it something, eventually just is it a hollow shell? So there are definitely these thematic connections between Angel's Egg and Ghost in the Shell. I mean, of course, Ghost in the Shell is much more. You have a lot more of the kind of emphasis on military hardware and that kind of thing, which you see throughout in some of Oshii's films, and you do see that in Angel's Egg somewhat as well. I mean, there's a scene of tanks kind of rolling through the city, and the image of the tank is something that recurs through Oshii's films as well. I mean, that's something that he introduces in Urusei Yatsura 2, Beautiful Dreamer, which took place before Angel's Egg. That's something that Oshii introduces, this a tank that kind of happens, that kind of recurs throughout the film, and he even kind of going on in some of his later films, he's incorporated tanks and military machinery. To get back to talking about Angel's Egg and Ghost in the Shell, those were two of the films that I did even kind of talk about and compare a little bit in my in the master's thesis that I was writing, that I eventually turned into the book. And I think that this is the case for a lot of, you might call them, auteur directors, directors who kind of have a very consistent theme or set of themes or visual style that kind of go throughout a lot of their films. An auteur, I've heard it said, really kind of makes one film, but keeps remaking it again and again in certain ways. I think that charge could certainly be leveled at Oshii. I mean, I've heard it said of him in a negative way, certainly, that a lot of his films are kind of reiterate the same things, and we see very similar themes. But I think that kind of throughout he is kind of expanding and kind of approaching these topics in very different ways. If I was to say something is very Oshii-like, one of the first things that comes to mind is I have kind of an image in my mind, but trying to kind of summarize that in words. Oshii's style can be very languid, can be it can be slow-paced sometimes. There can be voiceovers, so you'll have images kind of going across the screen and somebody talking, not necessarily about what's going on screen, but maybe about some sort of philosophical concept, which might be another Oshii hallmark, talking about religion or philosophy, or having quotes specifically from the Bible or from philosophers that are kind of dropped in those kinds of voiceovers or in conversation. I think another hallmark of his style might be He often seems to be much more interested in worlds rather than characters, perhaps. So, if you think about like Kusanagi from Ghost in the Shell, I mean, she's a very iconic character, but she's not really, her psychology isn't really explored in the film very much. I mean, kind of what we get from her comes out of conversation and comes from what we see in the environment. And I don't think it's necessarily so much that Oshii can't do character, but that he's not particularly interested in character. I mean, I think he's much more interested in kind of constructing a world to show the audience and discussing some philosophical themes and things like that are going on in the world, rather than having very specific kind of character studies. But Oshii doesn't really work in what you might call the stereotypical anime style, which I don't want to necessarily kind of theorize or put reasons on anything, but it's been a while since Oshii has done a full-length animated film. I mean, I think Skycrawlers came out, I believe, in 2008. So, I mean, it's been, almost, it's getting close to 10 years since Oshii's done, a full-length anime film. He's been doing much more in the way of live action recently. I would have to say that I'm really interested in what Oshii is going to be doing next. One of the reasons why I really like Oshii and when I find him fascinating as a director is because he has done so many different things. So not only has he directed films and television shows, but he's also written novels, he's written manga, he's directed live action films, he has directed a stage play, actually, based on Tetsujin, based on Gigantor, that ran, I don't remember how long ago. So he's done theatrical work. He is going to be doing these shorts, these animated shorts for Toonami coming up. He has done he's worked on kind of like a visual novel. He's done a whole bunch of different things, which is one of the reasons why I find him very interesting as a director, that he's not just a film director, that he has done video games. I didn't even mention video games. He's finds a lot of inspiration, and at least he has in the past, a lot of inspiration and influence in video games. So not only does he takes in influences from video games, but also he takes in influences from European art house cinema, from old Japanese films, from other animation, which is one of the reasons why, again, I just find him really fascinating as a director, and I'm interested to see where he's going to be going next with whatever it is that he produces.
もしもし、南雲と申しますが。
元気そうだ。